Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the third Los Angeles County Office of Education CLIC webinar. We will be focusing on support for English language learners in the History Social Studies classroom. I am one of your hosts. My name is Barbara Doughton, and I'm joined here by my colleague.
Hi, I'm Sandy Line.
Before we begin, we'd like to go over a few of the webinar logistics. If you could please mute your phone or your microphone. The microphone icon can be found in the lower left corner of your screen.
Please use the chat box for submitting comments or questions.
This webinar will be archived for later viewing, so feel free to alert colleagues and friends of this webinar. As I said, this is the Los Angeles County CLIC team, which is led by Dr. Michelle Herzog, who is the coordinator for History Social Science for the entire county of Los Angeles.
The webinar is, our third webinar is supporting ELLs in the History Social Science classroom. We will provide you ideas and techniques to support and challenge your ELL students in History Social Science.
So let's get started.
Take a look at this screen. Monetary policy is the exercise of the central bank's control over the quantity of money and interest rates to promote the objectives of national economic policy. If the economy is at less than full employment, increases in the money supply tend to increase the real NNP, and decreases in the money supply tends to decrease the real NNP. Now, if you were in that economics class, how would you feel? What are you curious about? What questions do you have? And what are your next steps as a student? Now, add to it, you're a second language learner. What are you feeling? Take some time and perhaps talk to your colleague or put some comments in the chat room about what you're feeling as you try to understand the content. Perhaps this is what you're feeling. We want all of our students to build their language skills and content knowledge, so we're going to address 3 topics which will support our second language learners. They are, first of all, how to use the key elements of the ELA and ELD Circle of Implementation to select content that increases discipline-specific knowledge and literacy skills. Secondly, how these skills can be leveraged to help students develop knowledge and effectively express their ideas. Lastly, how can the learning be organized around relevant inquiries to help students put into practice critical and civic action to address challenges in their community, state, nation, and the world? Take a look at the Circle of Implementation. This is directly from the ELA-ELD framework. Notice the 3 circles. The outer band, the orange band, is what we want our students to be able to do and be when they graduate. But we want to look at all the inner 2 circles. And how does the Circle of Implementation illustrate the goals we have for all of our students in History Social Science? Take a minute and perhaps talk to your colleague or put something in the chat room about the Circle of Implementation. The History Social Science framework connects to the Circle of Implementation in these ways. Each California school and school district is responsible for ensuring that all ELs have full access to a rich, comprehensive History Social Science curriculum via appropriately designed instruction, and that each EL makes steady progress in their English language development related to History Social Science. That's from page 512 of this framework. In addition, the academic language used in the History Social Science curriculum for ELs must be specifically designed, planned, scheduled, and taught. How do we do this? What strategies must we put in place to help our ELs? So let's return to our first topic. Talk to a colleague or place your comment in the chat room. How can we use the circle of implementation to select content which increases specific knowledge in disciplinary schools while also building academic vocabulary for our EL students? These are the factors we must consider when we make text and material choices. We need to look at the students' language development, where they are and where they're going. We want them to know about content knowledge, making meaning, effective expression, and foundational skills. In addition, the materials we use must also be engaging, respectful, intellectually challenging, motivating, and integrated. And if you look at the last two slides, these are taken directly from the Circle of Implementation. In language development, you have probably found this to be true. Many of our students are hesitant to speak in class because they are unsure of the correct word choice. What are the strategies we can use to help our students speak more in a history social science class? Talk to your colleague or add a comment in the chat room about a strategy you have used. Have you tried these techniques? What about student pairs? Do you have your students practice before they speak? Can students repeat answers for each other? That really helps lower the affective barrier. What about word walls? How about think, ink, pair, share? Giving the students time to think about the answer, write it, and then share it. What about sentence frames and sentence starters? We also have auditory resources, DVDs, CDs, books on tape, help the students understand the language. What about teacher read-alouds? What other methods can we use to develop language? Again, talk to your colleague or add a comment in the chat box. How do we get our students to become comfortable with history, social science, academic language? This is really an area that we have to concentrate on because our discipline has so many academic words that students may not be familiar with. Additional techniques to help them would be identifying root words between languages, providing opportunities for an extended discussion of the text, meaning and interpretation, providing individualized instruction for struggling students, and last of all, providing explicit vocabulary instruction. Key words are important for our students. In addition, use graphic organizers, flashcards or study guides, and really focus on the text, illustrations, the graphics, and the passages. Be sure you ask your students what they understand and what they have questions about. The next area that we need to look at is meaning making. All of you know about Bloom's taxonomy, and you know about the different levels of Bloom's, but in helping to make meaning for our students, we want to use pictures, multimedia presentations, personal connections that the students can see the connections, real-world connections. We also want to be culturally sensitive. And last of all, and this is critical, explanation of idioms. So often we use idiomatic speech in our classroom, and our students don't understand those idioms. So we need to explain them as we're going along. Talk again to your colleagues. What are some other ways we can help our ELLs put all of these pieces together? If you have a comment in the chat room, please add it. Effective expression. This is getting our young people to talk. Effective expression is generally active, requiring full brain engagement. Try these things. What about classroom games which require spoken responses and not just yes and no, but full sentence responses? What about oral reports and presentations? Some of our ELs are hesitant to do this, but perhaps doing it in a group presentation will give them the confidence to do a presentation. Whole class discussions, choral responses. Can you add some other ideas? Talk to your colleague or add something in the chat room. Last of all, foundational skills. Our students need to write. They need to be able to express themselves orally and in writing. And we have to give them the writing supports that will help them understand the structure of English as they write as often as possible. Ask your students to respond to engaging prompts, which shows their thinking and allows them to practice their writing skills in history, social science. Some of the ideas that you can use for writing activities are short answer assessments, closed sentence materials. Closed sentence materials are particularly good for our very beginning EL students. What about note-taking, independent compositions, friendly or business letters, and most important, teach your students how to edit their written work and review what they have written.
Thank you, Sandy. So Sandy did a very good job of laying that groundwork with the circle of implementation. And now we'd like to explore how the skills called out in the circle of implementation can be leveraged to create engaging, relevant learning experience for our ELs and all students. So what does the framework say about supporting the development of academic English? If you go to chapter 20 on page 511 in the History Social Science Framework, it states, teachers should focus instruction on intellectually rich and engaging tasks that allow students to use academic English in meaningful and authentic ways. So here's a question I'd like you to consider. How might we use global themes to engage students, to motivate them to take action, and to develop their academic language and citizenship skills? Write your responses in the chat room. Let's take this idea of a global theme and let's look at global migration, something that is in the news a lot these days, but it's also something that we as history social science teachers have to teach about. Where do we see the theme of migration in our history social studies standards? Think about this and write your ideas in the chat room. So students in the 4th grade learn about the westward movement, how pioneers migrated from the East Coast to the West Coast. In the 6th grade, students learn about the invasion of the Roman Empire by outside groups as they migrated into the Roman Empire. And in the 20th century, while India is being partitioned, there is a mass migration of different religious groups from India to the newly created Pakistan. And today, we have groups coming from the Middle East, escaping war and famine, migrating to other parts of Europe, specifically Eastern Europe, as they search for ways to make their families safe, earn a living, and try to restructure their lives again. So when we develop or introduce an idea like migration, that is a big concept. We have to start with students and their understanding of this word. So what might be some of the things that you would do to unpack or uncover what students know and understand about migration before you even start the lesson? Use the chat room to identify some of those ideas. The Global Oneness Project is a site that teachers can go to. It's absolutely free, and what they do is they provide video and photographic essays to help students connect through stories and the human experience on global and local issues such as climate change, water scarcity, food insecurity, poverty, migration, and sustainability. And they examine these through lessons that focus on identity, diversity, hope, resilience, imagination, adversity, empathy, love, and responsibility, and our common humanity. These are free video assets and they're photographic essays, and they have lessons in English and Spanish, and it might be a really good starting off point for you to get kids talking about this issue of migration. But let's go back to our classroom. How would you develop questions to promote discussion and uncover student knowledge about this topic? Discuss with your colleague and enter your ideas in the chat room. What kinds of questions might you present or have students develop around this theme of migration? Here are a few that we have thought of while we're looking at this concept of migration. Do you know anyone who has migrated from one place to another? Why did they come? How did they get here? What was their experience once they arrived? These might be some introductory questions that in a pair share activity students can start to explore. But wait, there's more. We talked about the development of academic language. We want students to start to use that academic language, but we have to teach that academic language. So developing a word bank that is explicitly taught of words that they might use as they discuss this idea of migration would be a really good strategy to help kids develop and practice those very important language skills. Words like migrate, migration, factors, environmental, social, economic, and political, all have something to do with migration and all have a very important role in the discussion of this topic of migration. You might also present them with some sentence starters, something like, I know someone who migrated to the city because, and my brother migrated to California to find. You might even ask that they use a word in the word bank to complete their sentence starters. Again, giving them practice with the language, but helping them with some of the tools that a good speaker and reader would use while discussing a very robust and complex subject like migration. So you have them talking about migration. You have them uncovering and unpacking some of their ideas. The next step might be to find some primary source materials to increase that pair discussion and go deeper in the content. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see a family who migrated from Alabama in the Great Migration in the 19-teens in the United States to find work in the North, specifically in this particular excerpt in Chicago. On the right-hand side, you see a pioneer woman. These are diary entries from pioneer women who traveled all those miles from St. Louis to California to Oregon to the West Coast in hopes of finding a better life and a better way to make a living. All of these are powerful tools as ways to getting kids to extend their knowledge, but also to expand their vocabulary. Again, we would pre-teach the vocabulary words we find in the source. We would provide a word bank with the readings, and we might even use visuals to assist in the understanding of those words. Using diary entries are particularly powerful because they provide the unique experience from the voice of the person who actually experienced that journey. All of this to help develop not only academic language, but another one of the skills in the circle of implementation, content knowledge. So we've discussed how you might introduce a big concept like migration, how you might get students to start to talk about this concept and unpack their learning or their understanding of this concept, how you might integrate some primary sources to expand that learning and that discussion and the increase of vocabulary that comes with that. But we're not going to stop here. The next step would be to have them think about this concept of migration in the context of current times. So here's a question that you might pose to have students make those historical contemporary links. What do people around the world today experience as they migrate from one place to another. With the different push factors of war, climate change, ethnic conflict, etc., global migrants struggle to find a safe place to settle and earn a living for their families. Discuss with your colleague or in the chat room, how could students use their understanding of historical migrations to learn about and take action on migrations happening around the world today? Also, how might being more mindful of making the historical connections to current and local global issues engage more students? Put your ideas in the chat room.
Step 3, organizing learning around relevant inquiries to promote civic action. How can teachers develop compelling questions which will provide access to both ELLs and EOs as they investigate critical issues and plan civic action? The Bracero program might be a topic that you can use in your classroom. Notice that in grade 4 and grade 11, the Bracero program is discussed. In the grade 4, it compares the Depression-era events to the institution of the Bracero program in 1942. In grade 11, we talk about continued migration, especially to the Central Valley, because these are folks who provided agricultural labor for our agricultural industry. How might you develop a compelling question that will guide student investigation of this topic on both levels? You could add an idea for your 4th grade students or perhaps for your 11th grade students. Have a conversation with your colleague or put an idea in the chat room.
So let's review what a compelling question is. A compelling question is rigorous and relevant, but accessible. It is connected to the standard and the framework, and it is explorable, which means it provides inquiry to support argument.
Please discuss with your colleague. Create a compelling question that students at grade 4 or 11 might be able to research and investigate about the Bracero program. Take a minute to think about it and then share your answer in the chat room. A compelling question that Barbara and I thought would be very stimulating is, how do human rights and the opportunity to earn a living intersect? And we would like you to think about, how does this question enable students to expand their thinking about the larger issues underlying the Bracero program? Talk to your colleague, please, and add some comments in the chat room. There are lots of sources that you can use when you are doing your research. And what types of sources might you consider gathering for your students as they begin to investigate a compelling question? Newspapers are really a good source of information. In addition, don't just look at domestic newspapers. What did the foreign newspapers say about this period? So you can get both sides of the issue. What about audio interviews, photo archives, research articles, journals? What about advertisements or government records? Notice on this slide, we have photos, we have a poster, and we have a graph. All of those become visually stimulating for our young people when they're examining a particular inquiry question.
So how can we provide access for our English language learners with the multitude of different inputs that they are going to be examining? At the National Archives and Record Administration, they have a series of documents that help students analyze primary sources. Whether that source is a poster, an article, a graph, there are different levels of document analysis sheets. And as the educator, you have the freedom and the skill to start to think about where do I want to start to grow the analysis skills of my students? Where are they right now in terms of their English language development, and which analysis document best aligns with where they are and to help me grow their academic skill? So by the end of the year, you may not be using the elementary, as shown in this slide, analysis poster, but maybe you can go up to the middle school and even the high school analysis, which is a lot more robust. Again, remembering that we need to start where they are linguistically, but the goal is to help them increase their academic language skills and their reading literacy skills.
An additional tool that's very effective when you are looking at two sides of the argument is a graphic organizer. There are lots of graphic organizers available for you, and we have shared some on the website. Venn diagrams are terrific for looking at both sides of an issue, and it helps the ELs frame their thinking and also to put their thoughts, clear their thoughts when they are addressing a particular issue. But it doesn't stop here. How can we help AELs practice foundational skills and effective expression to take civic action that will address the essential question? Foundational skills and effective expression are two of the key items that are found in the Circle of Implementation, and we want them to be able to practice both. So how would this foundational skills and effective expression lead to how do human rights and the opportunity to earn a living intersect? Take a moment to talk to your colleague or add an idea in the chat room.
So while students are learning about effective expression and foundational skills as they're thinking about civic action, they have to really attend to the definition of civic action, which is working together to make a difference in the life of your community, state, nation, and the world. But how do they do that? What is it that they need to consider as they make plans to addressing a topic such as human rights and the opportunity to earn a living, or the topic of global migration and what is gained and what is lost when people move around the world? That is where the Circle of Implementation helps teachers to really gather the resources and the skills that students need to become effective citizens and participants in our growing democracy.
Take a moment to talk to your colleague about effective expression and foundational skills. What strategies would you use to help them develop their expression and foundational skills built around the inquiry question? Share in chat room your ideas.
Here are a few of the ideas that we have discussed and thought about. Number one, have students learn about the workplace and the rules around keeping people safe. Civic action can be becoming more knowledgeable. It doesn't always have to be leading a protest. Number two, learn how to use social media to educate and promote social change. So accessing and leveraging what students already use, but repurposing it for another purpose, which is to become more active and engaged citizens. And the third one, join with like-minded people. Have students research and find out more information about non-government organizations like the United Nations Association, like the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and other local community action groups that they could network with and join forces with and actually see the change that they want to have in their local community, their state, their nation, and the world.
We want to revisit the three goals of this webinar. One, using the Circle of Implementation to select content that increases discipline-specific knowledge. Secondly, how these skills can be leveraged to develop knowledge and express their ideas, help students to express their ideas. And last of all, how learning can be organized into relevant inquiries and civic action. These three topics can be put together to develop a wonderfully robust and engaging classroom for our ELs and our EOs. Next steps. LACO and CLIC, which is Content, Literacy, Inquiry, and Civics, will be continuing its programs next year. We want you to stay tuned, and we hope you will be involved in our programs that we present for 2019 and 2020. Thank you so much.